it's weird because it's a survival game that also has a ton of humor, and it doesn't take itself seriously, except for when it takes itself very seriously.
Alex, I hear that you have been exploring a little bit of space, the wacky world of space.
Burst, as Tim Curry once said.
Spice! The final frontier. Yeah, you had played a game that I played a long time ago, called Breathedge.
I did. I was like, I would like to try this out. It looks interesting. I know it's free from Epic. I didn't pay for it, so there's your one caveat there.
Right. After you said that you were playing it, I was like, well, I'll go back and try it again, because my first impression was not very good. But
yeah.
I'm going to attempt to play it a second time. So I put in some time with it as well more recently. But
You've probably put more hours in than I did.
I did.
Let's be real.
Yes, I'm further along. Now, you started by playing the survival mode, right?
Yeah, I started with just the standard mode, and honestly, when I told you about it and you said that, yeah, you'd play some and then we can talk about it, I was like, all right, well, maybe I'll go back in and play some more, but I'm going to swap it down to the story mode because I wasn't really gelling with the survival mechanics.
Yeah, what was the big problem that you were having with the survival mechanics? I can kind of imagine.
So, okay, to preface this for anyone who's not played or seen Breathedge, it takes place in space. You have a little part of a shuttle that is there. That's your base of operations, I think, for the most part.
It's where you start, but basically, yeah, the ship that you were on that's carrying all of these caskets, it's the Breathedge coffin company, or whatever they call it.
Funerary services.
Yeah, the funeral services has broken apart, and it's just exploded into a bunch of pieces, and so you are in this one hab area that's like at the back of this game world that is like your starting place of operations.
Yeah. But yeah, so you go out in your spacesuit and you can collect all of these things. It's a survival game, so you're going to collect different things for survival, for tool making, for crafting, all this stuff.
Yes.
My issue was that I didn't enjoy any of the survival mechanics. The issue I was having was that it wasn't a big deal of like having to eat and having to drink, having to sleep and whatnot. That wasn't a big deal itself, but having to go out and collect all the materials and then come back because of the oxygen. Well, the oxygen, I guess, was the big one. Coming back every like less than 5 minutes to refill my oxygen.
Sure.
And I understand, yes, you could build some oxygen places out in the world, but the amount of materials you had to collect to then build that, to then have to refill that, everything felt really tedious.
So the oxygen mechanics that are in the game basically say that you have a certain level of oxygen. I think they start you off at like 75, I want to say, for a counter.
Like that.
And it's basically like per second. Is you drop a unit. So you're looking at being out there for like a little more than a minute before you start running out of oxygen. And once you're out of oxygen, it starts depleting your health pretty quickly.
Right.
Now there are upgrades in this game because you have equipment, and so the first one actually pretty much doubles it. It's like goes to 150. And then the one that I did get by like chapter 2 puts it up to like 200 or something, 200 and change. And there's also some more mobility ability because, as you probably noticed from the early game, you don't move very quickly.
You don't.
No.
And that's, I think, part of it for me too, was that collecting the resources is tedious, but you're also not moving very fast, even with the accelerator that you get.
Yeah, because you can start getting accelerators, but your accelerators really only increase your speed by like a couple meters a second. This is a little bit of an issue, only because they space out your places that you can go to, and you obviously have to consider return trips in order to get to your ship. And there are, the oxygen balloons that you can set up throughout the world, but you have to think very strategically about where you want to place those, because
Right.
even in that first area, there are essentially like 2 different forks that you kind of have to take to get the necessary components to get to the next area. As you probably found out, there's like that one place where there's like the paint and the lead that you have to go over there, but it's a completely different fork from the like the cold liquid line that freezes you if you're not careful.
Right.
And you have to deal with both of these to craft certain things so that you're able to deal with the radiation to get to the next area where you find another ship. Something I remember having a problem with when I first played that I still have a problem with now is the inventory system.
Yes.
Every single unit that you get of a material takes up a block of your inventory space.
Right.
If I collect 5 scrap metals, that's 5 inventory spaces. Paint and a few other things will take up 2 by themselves. And so it's very easy to get completely inundated with inventory space, and if you need to manage it while you're in space, your oxygen keeps going down while you're managing that.
Yes.
It's also not helpful that you have some places where you can store materials, but they have the same kind of storage material, so you're constantly I was making constant suitcases and trying to organize all of my materials into the various suitcases. But then you have another problem. Since you're going from this one place and you have to keep migrating out to other locations, the resources that you've stored there don't come with you, and you only have so many you can carry. So now I have to get back there if I want to keep any of those resources or materials.
And then you can't put things in the suitcase and take the suitcase with you.
Exactly. You have to have some mode of transportation for the suitcase.
Which I just want to say is weird, because if you're in microgravity, as we mentioned earlier, it's not 0G, it's microgravity. Because you're still near a planet, so there is some gravity, it's just very light. Anyways, if you're in microgravity and you've got a suitcase full of items, it's still not going to weigh anything. It's not going to be encumbrance.
Yeah, I would have liked to have like some sort of suitcase daisy chain or something that you could put on you, like, here's a hook that you can carry so many suitcases or something, so that
or just be able to hold it in your hands.
Or being able to hold it in your hands if you needed
and
to.
Just, let's load it up with lead paint. Let's go.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, that's an issue. I didn't really care for the inventory system. And then, as per games that are crafting like this, having to have all the materials on your person I get it. You want to have them on you so you can craft things, but I personally think it's better when you can craft them in a small radius with whatever is around you.
Yeah, I think that they're getting smarter about this, because I've seen more that will just be able to pull from your chests and your overall inventory space with your chests at your houses. This does not do that. It came out a few years ago, so I don't know if that was a purposeful choice or if it's just the limitations of the time. The other thing that doesn't really help you with the inventory is the amount of tools that you need to have on you.
Yes. That is one of the other things I really didn't like.
Yeah, and the thing about it that's so unnecessary is, like, your tools are breaking down all the time. They have so many uses. So you feel like you have to keep backups in case you're in 0G, you have to get back to the ship, and your thing breaks, and now I, can't collect the valuable resources that I have. But then they also make, it seems like a concerted effort to, just have one tool that does one very specific thing. I have a little magnet, a little magnet unlocker, and the only thing that it does is unlock caskets. That's it. That's the only thing it does. There is a tool that is like a soil analyzer. I think there's only one point in the entire game where I'm ever going to need it, but in the meantime, I have to craft it and I have to keep it in my inventory, and if I want to use it, I have to try to figure out how to arrange the 4 keyed in pieces that I have down at the bottom, which I don't understand. I'm playing with a keyboard and a mouse. Why can't I have 10? Just keyed into the different pieces. They'll still only give you 4. Maybe because they figure you're playing with a controller, and they figured the D-pad is the...
On my first playthrough, because I started on standard, was with the controller. And you know what is 10 times easier to play? With a keyboard and mouse? This game.
Oh, yeah, because when you're trying to catch stuff in 0G and you're floating, aiming and then collecting at the same point is so difficult with the controller. But with a mouse, I can aim and click at the same time. And they didn't figure that out. But anyway, yeah, so half of my inventory space was keeping food packets, oxygen candles, and all of my tools on me. It took up like half to 2/3 of my overall inventory, depending on, where I was at. And just the fact that, like, oh, you need this specific tool, this is the grabby tool. Okay, and so I need to keep a grabby tool, and I also have to keep a smacky tool, and I also have to keep an analyzey tool, and then you get a laser pistol, which does different things than this. And I just kept thinking there was such an easy way to get around this, is to eventually just, once you start to get too many tools, have schematics that are multi-tool schematics that do multiple things.
Sure. Or have a way that you can repair your tool. Yeah, absolutely. In 0G, that you can repair it out in the wild. That would also be good. Playing on the story mode, which makes it so you don't have to worry about any of your survival mechanics aside from your health and freezing and radiation. Not having to deal with oxygen or food or thirst does help a bit to make it a little bit more, I'm hesitant to say fun.
Sure.
But it does help to make it a little more approachable, because no longer do you have to gather as much ice.
Yeah.
You don't have to gather the nutrition gel or the honey if you don't want to. You don't have to keep food and water or any oxygen on you. It frees up so much inventory space.
Oh, yeah. I can totally understand that. The thing that I think is real unfortunate is that a lot of people might have pieced out on the game because of the frustration of those mechanics before they get to, like, Chapter 2, because...
I believe it.
Yeah, because you did too. You didn't really play much of Chapter 2.
I didn't. I played it up until the beginning of Chapter 2. I got a couple of the engineering things, and I went... I was telling you earlier, I got to the point where it's like, hey, you can make this magnet thing to open up the caskets, and it goes, new task, open 200 caskets.
Right, which I can tell you is a troll. That is absolutely troll. You unlock a few. Yeah.
It was a troll, but at the same time, it was like, nah,
we trolled right out of the game is pretty much what happened.
That's the point it lost me, even on story mode, without having any of the survival mechanics being necessary.
Right.
I do want to say, though, as much as the gameplay didn't really catch me, and I really didn't enjoy it a whole lot, I enjoy survival mechanics a bit, but not like this. And this... the setting didn't really help a lot. Like, the story was interesting.
Right.
I will say that the one thing I really did enjoy about the game was the story.
Yes.
And was the humor.
It's very irreverent, like, through the whole thing. The one thing I did find, though, and I found this weird the first time, is that there is a bit of an interesting tonal shift between those two things, where we're very irreverent when we're talking about, like, the machines that are trying to get the story out of us at the very beginning, and the little log tapes that are, safety in you or whatever. You have the immortal chicken that you always have on you that never dies for some reason.
For whatever reason, yeah.
Yeah, there's a point in Chapter 2 where you have to get into, like, a military base, and you craft a military suit, and when you walk up to the door and the little robot sees you, you pull out the immortal chicken, and it's dressed in fatigues as well, and he goes, "Oh, hello, Captain Sir," and lets you into the military base. So they've got that going on. Especially when you're in the Habs. When you go out to space, though, it feels like they're trying for a completely different atmosphere. The music starts really slow and low, almost like just this light atmospheric kind of flavor. It doesn't feel irreverent like those interior spaces, as if now you're getting into a cold, distant world where everything is just so far and vast away from you.
Which makes sense because you're in space and
Right.
everything is cold and vast.
Right. It's just weird that the tone is shifted so much between the reality of it.
It has one of those issues I have, I think, with like Borderlands.
Okay.
Which is the gameplay is so far distant from the way they tell the story in tongue-in-cheek humor.
Okay.
And it's not quite as bad as Borderlands is with it, because Borderlands smacks you over the head with their humor every single chance they get.
Oh yeah, even with the enemy names and missions, you know.
Yeah, everything is just there to be a little bit tongue-in-cheek, a little bit of the humor, a little bit of a lewd joke. This doesn't do quite as bad as that, I don't think, as much, but it's still very often. But it's not to the same extreme. So I enjoyed some of the humor and the way things were said, and it's like, oh, when you found the guy that was handcuffed to the bed with a lampshade, pull through him, it's like, oh, okay, all right then. But like, it's not. It's weird because it's a survival game that also has a ton of humor, and it doesn't take itself seriously, except for when it takes itself very seriously.
Right, which is usually the survival mechanics when you're out in the vastness of space.
Right.
The one thing that's interesting is that, like I said, most people probably pieced out on it before they really got into Chapter 2, and I really had to the first time, but I was like, I'm gonna forge ahead because I know that there are, ease of convenience things that happen later on, and it was soon into Chapter 2 where they give you your first vehicle, and you get the broomstick, which is like basically an outer space motorcycle that you get on, which goes significantly faster and just needs fuel and can be repaired with a repair tool, which again is another thing you have to keep in your inventory. But instead of going like 4-5 meters a second like you normally do when you're floating, maybe up to like 7 if you're thrusting, the broomstick now can do like 40. So now actually I can, with a couple upgrades, go directly from hab to hab and just make a straight shot back without running out of oxygen. But then you get into the next section and they're like, oh, well, we have to reduce the radiation so you can get to this next part. And there are now 6 different tasks that all have different sorts of mechanics in them that you have to go through to reduce the radiation. And it's around this time where you're kind of like going, oh, there's a giant container of mayonnaise that I have to figure out how to shoot towards the radioactive thing. And there's a big cannon, and I can make the cannon fire, and then it fires off in the wrong direction, but it allows you to get into the big shuttle because you've cut off part of the big cargo hauler. Now you can get in there. These little kind of puzzle pieces that they put together while you're exploring out there. And then there's the base building, because there is actually habs you can build.
Which I saw in like the intro video, but I never made it far enough to get into that. And I can only imagine from doing the rest of the game that the base building would have been a chore.
It can be, because you start by actually building a, like, habitable area, like an actual module, and then the module does not have any of the interior space stuff that you're used to, like oxygen, or life support, or electricity, power, and stuff. So you have to also, once you get in there, you have to build the individual stations just so you have the power necessary and the oxygen capacity. You have to build your replicators or whatever. You have to build your crafting stations and all of that. And I'm gonna guess that at some point I might be able to actually pilot it from one place to another. But I don't necessarily think so, because there is another shuttle that I think you can repair that then becomes a ship you can use. So So I started building this base right outside of a hab, and I'm just building it out with different modules and stuff. But I started to be like, am I even going to be able to use this after I leave here? I think that this is just going to be sitting around after I leave this. A little disjointed. I didn't get to like chapter 4, but I was reading a little bit of a walkthrough of chapter 4 just to see like if I keep going, how much am I going to have to do? And it seems like if you thought the 6 tasks to eliminate the radiation were a bit much, a couple chapters later, they're like, oh, here's all these different things you have to get done to progress to the next area. And it's like, I just, it's so much busy work just going back and forth and back and forth.
Right.
And it's just annoying that I have to keep doing that. When I played Breathedge, the way I described it was worse Subnautica. And I still implore people, if any of this that we've talked about sounded at least interesting, please, just play Subnautica instead. And the reason, there's a few things that it does differently. Like, first of all, you always know where there's oxygen, because it's the surface. If you can get to the surface or an underground vent, you know that there's oxygen available. There's base building that you can do, but you can do it pretty much anywhere. And, you can, and you always have land masses to attach to. But the biggest thing that Subnautica has going for it that Breathedge doesn't is that Subnautica is teeming with life. And Breathedge feels lifeless in its entirety. There's just
Which,
nothing.
Again, it's meant to because it's space.
I think that's kind of the problem with it, right? Is that because it's space, it feels big and vast and lifeless and also spaced out so much, where it just feels like a dead world that you're going through, where the only things you really interact with are like robots, at best. Subnautica does the complete opposite thing. You leave your shuttle to go into this world, and the first thing that you see when you go out into that world is a world teeming with life forms. Just tons of aquatic life and a built world that you can totally like explore and go out. You're not really shoehorned into different paths because of distance. You can kind of move around the map a lot right out of the gate and explore this underwater world that they've built. And I haven't gone back to it since they installed the stuff where you can actually go onto like the crashed ships that were there before. But I hear that that's really interesting because it's like more focused, narrated pieces. But there's nothing in Breathedge that's going to be as intimidating as seeing some of like those kraken creatures that are now coming for you, or investigating a wreck and finding out that there's like these little sand monsters that come out and go right in your face, or exploring kelp and such. Yes,
Breathedge 2 is a thing that's in production.
Breathedge
coming
2,
out soon.
Breathedge 2 is a thing that's in production. Well, there's something. Here's one thing that I will tell you that made me think about Subnautica when I was playing Breathedge, is that there's one part in Chapter 2 where you have a shuttle that was like the biotech lab, right? And so you're thinking, oh, maybe there's cool stuff going on in this. And you pop open. If you get explosives, you have to build explosives, 4 of them. You pop off the cap and it comes back. And when you do that, you see all of these like life pods. And it's got this alien like giant chicken monsters in them. And you're like, oh, am I going to have to fight those? Are those around the ship? Are they going to come to life? Can they breathe in 0G or something? I wonder what's going to happen here. I started getting really interested, like, oh boy, is this almost going to become a horror survival game or something? And I get in there, and I work my way through the facility, and I push a button, and it launches the whole section with all of the monsters they were breeding to the planet. And there's like this overture where the computer is saying we're going to try to make a thing that this was actually completely natural, that they are natural life forms, or that it's an alien invasion, and they'll work on it down there. That's the last you see of the alien pod creatures again. It's kind of like hand waved away.
It feels like any of the interesting story beats they had, like any bits that were going to be interesting.
They kind of hand waved it.
They just went, here's the thing, this could be interesting. Look at these mutant chicken monsters. Oh, they're gone.
Yeah, they did. They really said, like, at every single turn, ooh, here's a really interesting thing. Don't worry about it.
Like, this is not something we're gonna delve into.
Exactly.
Kind of like when you get the key into the, like, you get into the cockpit, on the bridge, rather.
Oh, yeah.
And you put the code in.
Yep.
And then you take the key out, the antiquated key, and you turn it, and you do the thing, and it's like launching, and then the ship just launches away, but the steering wheel stays with you.
Yeah, you're there, and the ship launches out there, and so you're still just stuck there, and they go, oh, that's not what was supposed to happen. Well, try to find your way to the next hab, and it's...
Yeah. And it's like, it wasn't really even that funny. It was like, oh... okay.
So this was
kind of sitting there
pointless.
wondering, like, I'm sitting there wondering, I've got the steering wheel in front of me and no ship, and I'm like, what powered this? Did this have any engines left?
Right, exactly. And like, what was the...
It's kind of like,
what was the purpose of this? Pretty much so that I could access the next area without having to go through 0G, pretty much.
Yeah. I feel like as much as I said I like some of the humor in it, I kind of feel like the humor in the game is meant to be like at the expense of the player.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
As opposed to something that the player can be like, huh, that's actually good. It's more like, haha, we got you, player.
Right. They're not so much poking fun at the genre or the situation. They're poking fun at the player for going, psych. You thought that was going to be fun? Haha. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Not fun.
I don't know. Fun. My verdict is Breathedge didn't
take your breath away?
Didn't take my breath away, thank you. That's what I was trying to think of.
Breathedge is fine enough as a survival game, but I think that it didn't really sell itself very well from the beginning. It starts off with this idea that it's going to be kind of a wacky, silly adventure, and then it doesn't really deliver on that for the majority of the game past that. And I think it's one thing that you see in a lot of these survival games that starts out really strong and gets a really clear vision of what they want to do, but then just loses the plot about an hour or so in and makes you wonder, what exactly are we doing? Why am I doing it? And what's the purpose to all of this?
Yeah.
That is not, however, Subnautica, which is why I say if you're going to play one, go play that.
This has not been a review of Breathedge. This has been a discussion of our time playing Breathedge.
And more importantly, what flaws in the formula could possibly be addressed with a Breathedge 2?
Who knows? Maybe you can play it, because I sure as hell am not interested.
Multi-tool, Breathedge 2. Come up with a multi-tool that I can use that has more functionality on it as time goes on, so it doesn't take up all... Or don't have it as part of the inventory.
Yeah.
That would also be good. Tools on a separate wheel. There you go. Do that. Or stacks. Please. Stacks. For materials. It doesn't even have to be big stacks. Just 10. 10 in a stack. So I don't have to constantly fill it back. Thoughts. Just random... Some thoughts for Breathedge 2. Anyway. Let's move on to something in the same vein, but that is not specifically about Breathedge.